Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the second Humanities on the Edge lecture of what is now the 8th year of the speaker series. My name is Ronald Judy. I'm Associate Professor of English here at UNA, and I'm one of the co-organizers and co-founders of the speaker series, along with Mark Rabel, who's sitting in the middle of the audience. He's a professor of English and film studies, also the chair of the English department, and also Jeanette Jones, Associate Professor of History, who is not quite here yet. She has another meeting. And Karen Moore, who's sitting here, and she's the representative of the Sheldon Museum itself on the organizing team. We founded Humanities on the Edge in 2010 in order to promote the kind of intellectual inquiry that approaches questions and problems facing us today from a rigorously theoretical perspective. To this end, each year we select a special topic and we ask our speakers to address this specific topic from the perspective of their own expertise. For this year, as you already know, we decided to focus on the topic of post-revolutionary futures, ? A decision inspired by the fact that this academic year coincides with the 100th anniversary of the Russian October Revolution of 1917 and the 50th anniversary of the global events commonly known as 1968. The topic of post-revolutionary futures was designed to bring to an end a 3-year cycle in the history of the speaker series. In 2015 and 2016, we started by raising the question of post-human futures, ? Our goal was to examine the changing definitions of the human being after the age of classic humanism has come to an end. In the wake of this opening, as a second step in 2016 and 17, we raised the question of post-racial futures, ? In order to examine, in the midst of these changing definitions of the human being, the way the category of race functions in contemporary political discourses. Our current topic, post-revolutionary futures, then asks the question of what remains alive today of the revolutionary tradition that was, historically speaking, contemporaneous with the age of classic humanism. What are the possibilities of meaningful political action in an age that is considered by many to be post-political in nature? So I'm especially excited about tonight's lecture as our guest, Ronald Judy's current research agenda, devoted to concepts like radical humanism, cuts across all three of these questions, that of the human and the post-human, the racial and the post-racial, and revolutionary and the post-revolutionary. So in an abstract theoretical way, I anticipate that he's going to connect some of these dots for us with these discussions that we had over the last 2 years. But to briefly forecast what's still to come after tonight's event, I want to briefly mention to you that next spring we'll welcome Tim Dean, Professor of English at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, who will talk to us on March 15th about the hatred of sex. And Bridget Cooks, an Associate Professor of African American Studies and Art History at UC Irvine, who will talk to us on April 19th about Black Artists and Activism, Harlem on My Mind, 1969. A lecture that will be accompanied by an exhibit she will curate for the Sheldon Museum. And last but not least, on February 9th, in collaboration with the Ross, we will also host the Brazilian documentary filmmaker João Salas, who will screen No Impensadora in Intense Now, which is a documentary film about 1968. In general, to stay informed about all of our activities, we invite you to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at the handle UNL HOTE. Before introducing tonight's speaker, let me briefly thank our sponsors and supporters. Without the generous support of the Departments of English, History, Modern Languages and Literatures, Political Science, Classics and Religious Studies, as well as the Institute for Ethnic Studies, the Global Studies Program, the African and African American Studies Program, the Sheldon Museum of Art, as well as UNL's Faculty Senate and Research Council, we would not have been able to bring tonight's guest to UNL. We also want to thank Anthony Holly for once again coming up with the design for our posters and postcards, NET Radio for allowing us to promote our events on their Friday at the Mail Show. Tomorrow morning, shortly after 9 a.m., our guest, tonight's guest, Ronald Judy, will be also featured on this live radio show. In addition, also, we would like to thank the Watershed Blog Collective, a group of mostly English graduate students who run an independent blog of critical theory at www.watershedblog.com. They publish essays on various topics, including on our guests' work and our lecture events. We thank them for putting so much effort and energy and time into supporting this series. So please join me in giving a round of applause to all of our supporters. And now finally a few words about our speaker, Ronald Judy, who is a professor of critical and cultural studies at the English department at the University of Pittsburgh. He is the author of Disforming the American Canon, African Arabic Slave Narrative at the Vernacular, published by University of Minnesota. He's also part of the editorial collective of the legendary and truly groundbreaking journal Boundary Truth, that is by now globally recognized as one of the most influential forums for the theoretical humanities. Recently, Professor Judy edited a special issue for his journal entitled The Tunisia Dossier, The Tunisian Revolution of Dignity. His numerous essays have appeared in top journals both in the United States and abroad, prominent for this year, and his translations from French and Arabic include crucial texts on the Tunisian Revolution. His current projects include books on Frantz Fanon and Islam's construction of the human being. I first met Professor Judy, or I should say, I first encountered the phenomenon Ronald Judy just a few years ago at Dartmouth, where he gave a plenary talk at the famous Futures of American Institute, where he's by now regular. As I was sitting there in the audience, listening to his talk, I was immediately struck by three things. First, I was struck by the sheer intellectual intensity of his presence on stage. Once he started speaking, the show was on. This should tell you that Professor Judy is certainly a thinking man. Second, I was struck by the infectious passion of his presentation. It was impossible not to care for what he had to say, because he himself obviously cared so much. This should tell you that Professor Judy is a dangerous man. And number three, I was struck by the intellectual honesty of his argumentation, fiercely passionate and ruthlessly logical. His thought, so devoid even of a hint of pretentiousness, was all substance and no fluff. This should tell you that Professor Judy is an even more dangerous man than he had thought. Since that day at Dartmouth, I've come to realize that this state of heightened intellectual exuberance, that for many of us is so difficult to maintain for more than a few passing moments, is his normal state of being. But as I sat in the audience that day at Dartmouth, barely a few minutes into his talk, I thought to myself, this man doesn't know it yet, but sooner or later he's going to end up in Nebraska. Alas, I was right. So please join me in welcoming Professor Judy, whose talk tonight is entitled Restless Flying from Haiti to Tunisia, What is After Revolution? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Roland, for a humbling and entertaining introduction. It's always nice to be able to laugh at oneself. Since I was a young pup and an aspiring Black Panther, I expressly set out to be dangerous. So I'm pleased to learn that I somehow have succeeded. I've been through here once before in 1962. For many of you, I think, will even dream. When my father was working for Martin Marietta in Denver, and we were driving back home. I'm from Minneapolis, and we drove through Nebraska, cutting across. I remember distinctively, very distinctively, I can still smell it, alfalfa. Alas, now it's gone. I want to thank Roland and Marcos for inviting me and for the hospitality they have shown. I want to thank all of the supporting cast who made this event possible and made my stay here truly quite pleasant. So much so that I'm hoping it's not the last time I come to Lincoln. Who would have known? It's quite an amazing place to have. So, to it. Restless flying from Tunisia to Haiti. What is after revolution anyways? If we assume the frame of reference for the question posed by my title to be civic republicanism, that is to say, the revolutionary principles fostered within the world of what the historian Charles Berlin called la civilisation atlantique, Atlantic civilization, then the presumptive response is simply politics. More precisely, some form of representative governance in which the political order, manifested in the institutions of the state, serves the commonwealth defined in terms of a free people or citizens. And that free citizenry is construed as such on the basis of some universal theory of man. Basing politics on such has long been the tendency of thought from Aristotle and Hobbes to Locke and Malebranche, from Hegel and Marx to von Neumann and Morgenstern. Along these lines, anthropology, in the classical sense of the discourse on the nature of man, is handmade to political theory and its attendant practices. In that regard, let us bear in mind that the call of liberté, which erupted out of Guaquimán in the northern province of San Domingo on August 14, 1791, was informed in some measure by the principles of universal human freedom enshrined in 1789 Declaration des droits de l'homme et citoyen, the declarations of man, the rights of man, citizen. And that the proper name for what began in Sidi Bouzid on December 17, 2010, in the south central plateau of Tunisia is Thawrat al-Karam wal-Hurriya, the revolution of dignity and freedom. That is its proper name. The Jasmine Revolution was Beninese in 1987. It's not a pleasant thing. And the Arab Spring was something for the trash heap. This is going on still. This revolution of dignity and freedom. The occurrence of these two iterations of freedom, separated as they are by considerable distance of space and time, is no small thing. Each in its particular eventfulness draws our attention to a crucial question arising with any revolutionary project seriously invested in the precepts of civic republicanism. What will be the basis and nature of community, of sociality in polity? Or to put it differently, what will it take to make my iPad work properly? What sort of political order is best suited to reflect and sustain revolutionary momentum? Both these formulations presuppose we know what is meant by revolution and sociality. That, however, is the presupposition I set out to trouble by considering the Tunisian revolution in relation to the Haitian. This clarifies at the outset the stakes in restless flying from Tunisia to Haiti, which is, so to speak, a return trip. And as is apparent from what I've just said, those stakes have everything to do with the question of freedom. Placing the Tunisian revolution in relation to Haiti raises another question. What is it? And how is it meaningful as an earthly, historic, human event? The most succinct answer to this is, paraphrasing Kant, the Tunisian revolution, which we have seen unfolding in our day, whether it may succeed or miscarry, finds in the hearts of all spectators who are not engaged in the game themselves a wishful participation that borders closely on enthusiasm, the very expression of which is fraught with danger. This sympathy, therefore, can have no other cause than a moral predisposition of the human race. The last sentence sums things up. This revolution is evidence that humanity can progress of its own accord. That, I think, is the significance of the Tunisian Revolution of Dignity and Freedom and all the details of its eventfulness up to the moment. And in that regard, it is far more analogous to the events that shook the Caribbean and French colony of Saint Domingue from 1791 to 1804 than it is to either those that transformed France from 1789 to 1795 or those from 1848 to 1871, rather, which ushered in the hegemony of the European bourgeois liberal nation state. I think this seems like, or rather I know this seems, like a radical provocation. I do not, however, intend it as a scandalous remark, but rather as a serious proposition aimed at getting us to think something else, as Franz Fanon put it. Its seeming scandalous has to do with its incomprehensibleness, which in turn has to do with a failure of knowledge regarding those events of Haiti, that as the Haitian anthropologist Michel Touriot asserted in 1990, repeating a statement he made in 1977, persist as unthinkable facts for which one has no adequate instrument to conceptualize. The true scandal, then, is not in the proposition of analogy between the Haitian and Tunisian revolutions, but in this epistemological failure, which perpetuates the refusal to recognize that they, Tunisia and Haiti, are neither derivative of or analogous to the French Revolution or the European Spring of Revolution, but are distinctive events of social transformations, which, while in part stimulated by a certain set of Enlightenment concepts and institutions, have taken a course that cannot be charted according to the dominant mapping of our common modernity. While it is perhaps unusual to think Tunisia belonging together in this way, there have been numerous considerations of the Haitian Revolution's historic significance. To name a few of the better known, we have the work of Touriot just mentioned. There is, of course, C.L.R. James's Black Jacobins, Eugene Genvise's From Rebellion to Revolution, Robin Blackburn's The Overthrow of Colonial Slavery, and the more recent work of Carolyn Fick, Lorraine Dubois, Susan Buck Morris, and Nick Nesbitt. Not to mention the work of Marcus Rediker and Peter Limbaugh, as well as Robert Palmer, exploring the perennial presence of revolutionary foundations as a phenomenon of the Atlantic civilization in general, to which we could easily add Arrigay, Hopkins, and Wallerstein's study of anti-systemic movements as a constitutive aspect of the planet-wide extension of the capitalist world system. As I said, the list is long. That granted, situating the current Tunisian revolution in relation to the Haitian, I am proposing that we need to seriously consider the latter as the beginning of a movement articulated with the world system that cannot be properly located in the world system. And that such events as the Tunisian Revolution can arguably be viewed as iterations, constituting a lineage of, to put it bluntly, other than European popular revolutions. By designating that lineage thus, I do not mean non-European, which would assume the question of Europe itself is settled. It is not. But rather the question of Europe is only one, demonstrably inadequate formulation of the principal conundrum of modern political science as well as the human sciences. What are we, and how can we see ourselves in common? Answering this question in a way that allows for the centrality of the Haitian-Tunisian lineage requires a historiography of revolution that not only makes use of alternative archives, but also deploys an alternative anthropology, by which I mean an alternative radical humanism. Along these lines, I recall for you that the Article 14 of the 1805 Haitian Constitution expressly uses the dénomination générique de noir, the generic appellation black, to define Haitians regardless of color. This raises an ancillary question. What does blackness connote? The careful investigation of which is for, unfortunately, another occasion. Although some sense of it is indicated in what follows in my talk. Right now, however, the thing to emphasize is that with regard to the Haitian Revolution, freedom is a question of practice, touching on a crisis that is fundamental as in constitutive of the continual struggle for full civic political enfranchisement, which is expressed by the question, what kind of free is this? The incomprehensibility of the commonality of the Haitian and Tunisian revolutions to current political and sociological analysis, the failure to properly locate them there, is indicative of the inability of these sciences to adequately address the issue of our being in common. In the case of Haiti, this is expressed as an outright hostility to the possible of there ever having been, let alone ever being, let alone ever having been a revolution. In the case of Tunisia, it is manifested as an equally assertive indifference. Both responses have a similar effect. The blockage of the revolutionary momentum through destructive neglect. There are two specific points of analogy to which I wish to draw your attention. The first has to do with why it is that both Haiti and Tunisia are incomprehensible as revolutions in their own right. The second has to do with how their incomprehensibleness notwithstanding, the Haitian and Tunisian revolutions function in common as actual catalysts for worldwide social transformation. Both are emblematic of the movement of les damnés to realize the better aspirations of humanist modernity. Universal human dignity and rights. This has certainly been so for Haiti historically, which has long been an emblem of radical revolutionary freedom among radicals, and not just black radicals, for 200 years, despite, precisely because of, the efforts of the great powers to erase it. Tunisia may perhaps, and this is the aspirational bit, come to be the same for our movement, if we would only pay attention. Perhaps the most significant thing the Haitian and Tunisian revolutions have in common is their apparent spontaneity. Of course, both were effects of long-standing social injustice, and both were preceded by other insurrections in response to that injustice. The failed insurrection of Jean Paul de Libre, led by Vincent Huget during the last 3 months of 1790, which sought to extend civic republicanism to all free Frenchmen, regardless of color. And the 2008 Gulf Mining Basin revolt, which sought social transformation through fair employment practices. These early insurrections, however, were more narrowly based and in varying degrees vanguardist. While the insurrections of 1791 and 2010 were more widespread, most significantly, the spread was somehow organic, with leadership emerging through the course of the process of the insurrection, rather than having started it. This is what we mean when we say they are spontaneous popular insurrections. What Alain Verdier described apropos to this just 5 days after Ben-Ali's fall as les émoutés, the riots. He offered the description during the 4th session of the seminar he was conducting at École Normale Supérieure under the rubric Que signifiait changer le monde? What does change the world signify or mean? The events taking place in Tunisia directly pertain to the express main concern of the seminar, which was, as Verdier put it, interrogating the past 2 centuries of enchantment with the idea of revolutionary transformation. I shall return to this point at the end of my talk. What I want to remark at this juncture is that the so-called riotous aspect of the Haitian and Tunisian processes are key to their respective incomprehensibility. On that point, let me return to my earlier paraphrase of Kant's assessment, which was of the French Revolution, given in his treatise on education, The Conflict of the Faculties. Kant's pronouncement on revolution have come under considerable scrutiny among political philosophers of late in accordance with a renewed investment in his conception of cosmopolitanism. The reason having to do with the idea that we may be indeed approaching such a world order. Kant is, of course, notoriously counter-revolutionary, precisely because, as Louis Beck and even Chris Supernick have pointed out, his theory of the rule-based deontological foundation of civil society, with its complicated elaboration of duties of right, virtue to the self, justice to others, dictates an absolute prohibition on violent rebellion. Nonetheless, he did publicly express enthusiasm for the French Revolution, seeing in the events of 1789 to 1798, when he wrote The Conflict, a mode of thinking, we might best call it daring to correct him, an emergent intelligence that demonstrates a character of the human race at large and all at once. That this should have emerged all at once, spontaneously, among the populace without the benefit of the breeding, Zucht, achieved through cultural pedagogy, is precisely recommended as evidence of human progress. As such, He deemed it evidence of the inherent universal human tendency of progressive change, where the movement is toward realizing a common association of life and living. The fact that even though for Kant this is expressly a communicative association in reason, its conceptual schematic is principally a function of imagination, need not concern us at this moment. I merely want to mark it as a useful insight for understanding the eventfulness of the Tunisian people spontaneously manifesting a certain sort of sovereignty when chanting in chorus while demonstrating on the Avenue Habib Bourguiba in January 2011, the slogan now identified worldwide with the Arab Revolution. Ashab yurid, Ashab yurid, Ashab yurid, Asqat Nizam. The people want to bring down the system. That slogan was extrapolated and paraphrased from the title of Abu Qasim Shaybi's 1933 poem, إذ أشعب يوم أراد الحياة, commonly translated as will to live, but more literally rendered as if the people one day will to live. Shaybi's poem, plainly aligned with the classical qasida in form and thematic as it is, has long been acclaimed throughout the Arab world as a rallying cry for independence. We could however term this the natural sovereignty of human freedom, as in self-conscious autopoiesis. It was precisely the unlawfulness of such collective imagination that inclined Kant to view the events unfolding on Saint-Domingue during the same time as those in France as the purest instance of collective irrational emotion, in the sense of ill-directed public commotion and unrest, riots, in other words, acting against moral reason, and so absolutely an illegitimate eruption of violence against not only government, but also civil society. It suffices to remark here that Kant's notion of authorized reciprocal coercion turns on the postulate that humankind is compromised of individuals who, even in the state of nature, are all rational, autonomous beings. These two aspects of Kant's thinking are key reasons why all he could see happening in Saint-Domingue was a slave rebellion. It is crucial we understand that this was not simply a failure of personal morals on his part, or some kind of irrational reaction to human difference. It was a fundamental function of Kant's transcendental deduction, of his account of what is our reality and how we have it, and so what it means to be a free human subject capable of enlightenment, of warranting the motto, sapere dare to be wise. In his assessment on all that, the Negro is a type of hominid, firmly situated in the natural domain of things, governed by physical laws, but not so fully within the supranational, naturalistic domain of persons, governed by rational moral law. By that light, the basis of Haitian revolution's incomprehensibleness to Rio references, and which Kant so nicely exemplifies, has precisely to do with the priority of the individual in the tradition of European political philosophy. It is because the so-called Negro cannot be admitted into the ranks of rational cosmopolitan individuals, and so cannot be the generator of civil society, that the prospect of a revolution forming a republic that is constituting a civil society is unfathomable and nearly unimaginable. My point here, however, is not about race per se. Rather, it is that what gets expressed as a problem of race with respect to Haiti is indicative of a more fundamental problem of anthropological psychology and philosophy. The long-enduring premise that only one mode of subjectivity drives history, and it has a definitive formation. The Haitian Revolution's being a contradictory corrective to this premise was announced by Jean-Jacques Dessalines on April 28, 1804, when he proclaimed the island's independence from France with the words, We have paid these cannibals back in full. War for war, crime for crime, outrage for outrage. I have saved my country. I have avenged all of America. Dessalines thus declared the establishment of the Republic of Haiti in his capacity as its first president, naming the new country by the supposed Arawakian term for the island of Hispaniola, the very first place to see the arrival of Iberian colonists and the emergence of Europeans on the world stage, was a symbolic, powerful statement, as was his reversing the accusation of cannibalism that had long justified the autochthonous people's enslavement and murder. By this statement, Dessalines signified an act of solidarity with not only all the oppressed populations, les damnés, of the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, but also the entire world, and was made explicit, which was made explicit in the language of the 1804 Constitution. I'm sure most of you don't know that subsequently the Prime Minister of Haiti would be the first country to, in writing, recognize the free Greek Republic when it achieved its autonomy from the Ottoman Empire. Dessalines understood this truly as a war of worlds. One is inclined to agree with Nesbitt's construal of that constitution as the first attempt to construct a society in accordance with the radical Enlightenment axioms of universal emancipation and universal human autonomy, calling for a society in which all human subjects retain their autonomous constitutive powers. One might quibble with Nesbitt's use of the term invention when characterizing the Haitian Revolution as the invention of an egalitarian freedom unknown in the North Atlantic, preferring instead manifestation, yet concur fully with his assessment of the revolution's scope. That this was the articulation of a distinctive historical subjectivity was remarked by Dessalines' secretary, Pompée Pelletin Garon de Castille, who was the earliest Haitian theorist and polemicist for the revolution, and writes about massive, spontaneous, autodidactic activity among the Haitian population that not only directly contradicts Kant's dismissal of the Negro as an inferior, more natural hominid, but is in evidence of his theory of humankind's capacity for auto-poetic progression. Indeed, the fact that Haitian didactic or autodidactic activity is in evidence of this even more than the French Revolution underscores just how woefully incapable the reigning theories of man, including Foucault's, we call this profoundly erroneous understanding of the Iranian Revolution, are in yielding any truly adequate knowledge about the eventfulness of humankind, about how the societies in which we actually live are as they are. To see how this problem of incomprehensibleness and contradiction relates to the Tunisian Revolution, we need merely recall Badiou's already mentioned characterization of it as les amours en Tunis, the Tunisian riots. What struck Badiou about the events in Tunisia, apropos the question of the idea of revolutionary transformation, was they contradicted the end of history thesis of globalization, a thesis which postulates le fait de l'humanité historique, the end of eventful history, the end of a moment where the organization of power could be overthrown in favor of, as Trotsky said, the masses entering on the stage of history. So that precisely such events as Tunisia, according to this theory, were not supposed to happen. In fact, are no longer possible. For the past 30 years, neoliberal globalization has been, as Badiou says, the only tenable form of general subjectivity. Once again, we are held captive by a powerful idealist concept of things, albeit touted as a reductive behaviorism or functionalism that interferes with our capacity to see what is unfolding before us. Certainly this subjectivity, this person becoming the global norm, has been the meaning of globalization until now. It has been a globalization from above that we have called in the French mode Americanization. underscoring its association with imperialism, or more consistently, neoliberalism, which is characterized by the premise that market values, the dynamics of high capitalist finance, are the absolute measure, not just of human progress, but existence as well. I have to stop and note, and I wrote this in the piece in Volume 2 on Strauss's The Question of Democracy, that Buffett, in the middle of the Trump years, made a very important remark publicly, and that was that Trump's economic policies were leading us into a structure of indebtedness so that we would become, and here was his phrase, a shared property economy. One has to pause the historical resonance of that phrase. Be mindful of where I'm standing, right? What was shared propertyism but the reestablishment of the structures of slavery in the service of capitalism? Right? Revisit Black Reconstruction by Du Bois. Or why we kept character. And so the economy of consumption and desire and consumption has been the sole determinant of what we are until now. I say until now because what the Tunisian Moutet signal is another mode of globalization. One expressly based on a set of values, dignity, liberty, and social justice, long associated with the civic republicanism of the three late 18th century Atlantic revolutions, which neoliberalism is supposed to have superseded. Remember, George W. announcing that the Westphalian Accord was done. Remember, in 2005, Tony Blair announcing that the promise of global liberalism was futile. So the market has superseded all of these ideals, and yet, here we have Tunisia. And this is what Badiou grasped, declaiming, what is fascinating above all else in the Tunisian events is their historicity, providing demonstrative evidence that the capacity to create new forms of collective organization is intact. In his drawing attention to the historicity of the Tunisian events, Badiou highlights two aspects of those events: that the values of civic republicanism were espoused by the masses on their own without the vanguard leadership of the elite. Even the syndicalist leadership played a supporting role to the popular insurrection. And that the new forms of collectivity emerging in the course of the revolution are in contestation with the market-driven processes of social formation. Although Badiou does not mention Haiti in his pronouncement on the historicity of the Tunisian events, as I just set out in my preceding remarks in the pond, both these aspects, in tandem, were pronouncedly and profoundly in evidence with the Haitian Revolution, much more so than they were in France. In fact, it is the general insurrection launched by the slaves in 1791 on Saint-Domingue, the wealthiest and most important of the anciens colonies françaises, that made it clear, that event made it clear there was tension between the revolutionary principles of universal human freedom enshrined in the 1789 Déclaration des Droits de l'Homme and the political economy of the market. Overthrowing the Bourbon Ancien regime did not end the French colonial empire. Moreover, the National Convention, being at war with the princes and kings of Europe, made it all the more dependent on the revenues generated by Saint-Domingue's extensive system of slave-based plantation agriculture. The slaves' insistence on their liberté immediately precipitated a systematic economic crisis that jeopardized the revolutionary French Republic's continued possession and control of the colony's resources, and accordingly, its capacity to survive, to wage war in its own defense. It is precisely those circumstances that led to the first successful armed native struggle for liberation from the French colonial empire, resulting in the establishment of the world's first independent black republic. They also, however, were elemental in the struggle for what will eventually become the République d'Haïti, inaugurating an historical lineage of post-colonial state formation, whereby the newly formed nation-state, in order to generate the revenues essential for its political and social viability, is compelled to continue its relationship with the imperial metropolis, reconfigured within the parameters of the international system's political economy as a provider of the natural resources fueling metropolitan capital growth. The political economic conditions of the decolonized state's legitimate inclusion within the international system calls for securing the economic sector so as to ensure continued productivity in a way that, more often than not, results in a militarized or quasi-militarized regime of control in tension with the foundational tenets of civic republicanism and the revolutionary struggle for liberation. The Haitian paradigm of that formation is clear when we bear in mind the historical events of the independent nation's emergence pertaining to the relation between republican freedom and economic discipline. The need to predicate enfranchisement on a certain relationship to work. A history that warrants recalling briefly because the instruction it provides about the historical development of the modern conceptions of freedom is invaluable. With Haiti, we get to work on freedom. Reconciling the revolutionary principles of freedom and citizenship with the demands of a war economy and the harsh realities of plantation architecture. Johnson's in my mind. Agriculture, of course, while securing the Republic's possession of the colony and suppressing the slave insurrection, was the task given to 3 civil commissioners, Sonfonax, Pauvrel, and Ayotte, who were sent in 1792 by the National Convention to administer the northern, western, and southern provinces respectively. Sonfonax led the way in seeking a solution with his Emancipation Proclamation of August 29, 1793, which was the first of its kind in the New World. The territorial scope of his proclamation was initially limited to the western part of the Republican Northern Province, where he had jurisdiction, the eastern part being under the control of the insurrectionist slave forces, who we can assume had already freed themselves. Under the leadership of Jean-François, Georges Piassou, and Toussaint Louverture, and were allied with the Spanish authorities of Santo Domingo. Pauvrel, whose jurisdiction was the west and south provinces, followed Sonfonac's suit 3 months later, issuing his own Emancipation Proclamation on October 31, 1793. Both proclamations expressly defined freedom for the Africain, using the local idiom distinguishing them from the gens de couleur libre, the free colored people, as the freedom to be wage laborers, to be given recompense for their work, 1/3 of the production yield, to be shared collectively among them, but still bound to the plantation, just as they had been in slavery. And this is specified in both Emancipation Proclamations. This identification of freedom with work was reinforced by Pauvrel's subsequent labor code, promulgated on February 7, 1794, in which he admonished the slaves to never forget that the only rights you have are those that come from your collective labor for the owner or the owner's estate. He further reinforces the restriction of the Republican freedom in quasi-moralistic terms of civic duty. The material well-being, le bonheur, happiness of each of you is inseparable from that of the owners and depends proportionately upon your efforts to multiply the owner's wealth. The French National Convention's universal abolition of slavery and extension of citizenship to freed slaves in all French territories issued just 3 days prior to Prouvel's labor code, did not at all end empire. Rather, it redefined the metropolitan colonial relationship in terms of racialized labor, within a likewise racialized hierarchy of civic order. Even though Louverture renounces the racialization of work when he consolidates his rule over a unified Saint-Domingue as a territory of the French Republic in 1801, he embraces Prouvel's terms of identifying freedom with work in his own work code. In order to guarantee that slavery was permanently abolished, a powerful permanent military was required to defend freedom, and that required restoring the economic prosperity of the plantation system. For Louverture, the absolute abolition of chattel slavery is one thing, but freedom as the right of enfranchised citizens to exercise individual liberties was something altogether different, which he opposed as leading to vagrancy and the degeneracy of moral and civic virtue. A distinction that is formalized in his 1801 Constitution, Title II, Article 3 of which proclaims there can be no slaves on this territory, certain as being forever abolished. All men are born, live, and die there, free and French. Title 6, Article 14 states, a colony being essentially agricultural cannot allow the least interruption in its labor and cultivation. And then Article 15, designating the plantation a habitation, defines it as a factory that demands a gathering together of cultivators and workers, its tranquil asylum of an active and constant family, of which the owner of the land or his representative is the father. Following this legislated paternalistic authority of the plantation owner, Article 16 declares every cultivator and worker is a member of the family and a shareholder in its revenues. It then proclaims free movement by the workers from the plantation, prohibits it rather. Any change in domicile on the part of cultivators brings with it the ruin of farming. And declaring this a vice disastrous for the colony and contrary to public order, it invests the governor with absolute authority to promulgate and regulate all measures of controlling agricultural discipline, the police. Referring to this constitution, Louverture writes, I have never believed freedom to be licensed, or that men who have become free should be able to give themselves over to disorder and idleness. His continued enforcement of the identification of work with freedom led to the Farm Workers' Revolt of 1801. Subsequently, that identification is not to be found in the first Constitution of Haiti proper, promulgated by Dessalines, as I said, in 1804, nor in the constitutions of 1805, 1806, and 1807. Although each constitution reaffirms the centrality of agriculture and commerce and their militarized policing, prioritizing the army in distinction from the workers. Thus, it was that concomitant with the formation of Haitian citizenship after independence of 1804, there emerged a military state, the basic foundation of which was laid down by Louverture using the material provided by Prouvel. Tony Boats has characterized this situation as that of two contradictory logics within the Haitian Revolution. One that circled around practices of freedom of the ex-slaves, and the other around the revolutionary army, which becomes a political elite with different conceptions of what the new state should be. While the event of the first independent Black Republic occurred at the collapse of the first French colonial empire, having been a major factor in that collapse, this pattern of post-independence formation of a vanguard national bourgeoisie, bolstered by a subordinate militarized class that presumes to protect the newly gained national freedom by securing continued access to the metropolitan-centric international system's commodity markets through a policing discipline of the economic sector's productivity, is equally discernible in the African states that achieved independence from the Second French colonial empire, including Tunisia. Of course, this is a story that we all know, and it's in the headlines today. But think about this. This is what happened in Haiti. And I can't go into making the questions. We can talk about it. The role that the US played, France played, Britain played, Spain played to maintain the structures such that they were, to make sure that this revolution just didn't go on. What the important role Haiti played in supporting, militarily, financially, the Bolivarist movement in Latin America, which of course is why Chavez was so friendly to Haiti, because of that recognized long revolutionary history. As we know, Fanon designated this pattern neocolonialism, which he describes as the emergent post-liberation national bourgeoisie discovering its mission to serve not merely as the intermediary between the nation and metropolitan capitalism, but as the transmission belt, his phrase for capitalism. We can say that he was calling on the historical Haitian experience, albeit not by name, as having forecast what might very well befall post-independence Africa. So too, when he equates the national bourgeoisie's economic role with the within the international capital system to that of cheap labor, Garnier Petit, whose task is to constitute the state as functioning primarily to regulate the relation between the individual and the economy for metropolitan capital interests, rather than as agent of the nation's revolutionary social transformation. At the crux of Fanon's analysis is the tension between the social political realization of the ideals of civic republicanism and the economic necessities. Thank you. And the economic necessities. Attended to that realization. And at the crux of that tension is the connection between economic production and freedom, both individual and national. In a sense, while marking the emergence of the struggle for national liberation from, as he put it, la confusion néolibérale universaliste, the universalist neoliberal confusion, Fanon is at the same time providing an analysis of how the struggle for democracy against human oppression is so fully circumscribed by the historicality of bourgeois modernity that slipping the yoke requires a fundamental epistemic rupture, a reimagining of the human. More plainly put, the matter at hand is the identification of work with freedom. The success of the post-colonial state is contingent upon its continued management of economic production and the forms of work required or permitted to the population. The point is that this antinomy of freedom and work, so vividly presented with the Haitian struggle, is endemic to the political realization of Enlightenment revolutionary civic republicanism. What's more, the crux of the problem is the identification of work and freedom as somehow a characteristic of what it is to be human. The characteristic Marx claimed, Hegel demonstrated. Bogue sees in the 1801 rebellion of the Haitian ex-slaves, while workers made subaltern by the emergent military state, a recognition that this identification was a major threat to their continual struggle for full civic and political enfranchisement. A recognition he paraphrases with the question posed at the start of my talk. What kind of free is this? Now, this is perhaps the moment to recall briefly the provenance of that question. It was attributed to an anonymous Jamaican ex-slave farm worker, quoted by John Salmon in a letter to T.F. Pilgrim, dated 25 June 1848, and reads in full as follows. What kind of free this? This free them human. This free worse than slave. A man can put up. The Jamaican context of its utterance is analogous to that of the Haitian. Having abolished slavery on the island in 1838, the Jamaican plantation owners were confronted with the very same conflict between freedom and work. As Governor Metcalfe acknowledged, the problem was not that the free blacks would not work, but they refused to give continuous labor, working only just as much as they liked, for the plantations, and dedicating much of their labor to their own freeholds. It was not possible, he observed, to combine the occupation of market gardener with estate laborer, because the success of the former deprived the planter the control over his labor essential to plantation profitability. Resolving the matter entailed implementing stringent labor laws rather akin to those in Haiti under Auditorium, effectively establishing a sharecropper economy. And as with the Haitian ex-slaves, this was ardently resisted by the Jamaican freedmen, for whom as well, freedom meant being able to decide when and how to work, and to do so for one's own property. Expressed positively, it was the freedom to be at work for oneself as one pleases, a condition that was diametrically opposed to the discipline of work on the large-scale estate plantation. Negatively, it was the freedom from being compelled by law, the law of state, to work for the profit of others at their bidding. No matter that the Haitian context was the independent state, whether republic or free or empire, and the Jamaican was that of a colony still under direct rule from the metropolis. For both situations, the question of freedom in relation to work was fundamentally about the nature of the triadic relationship between individual, market, and state. The state legislates the form whereby the individual enters or otherwise engages the market as labor, giving capital investment greater leeway. The market may very well determine the need for as well as the type of work required for capital growth through its technologies and concomitant disciplines of production. But it is the state that manages individual access or availability to work. And in the independent state of Haiti, as well as the colony of Jamaica, the agenda was to bring as many individuals into labor as the plantation needed for the sake of profit. And in the case of Tunisia, it was the opposite, to keep as many people out of the market as possible. But what happens when work does not make one free? Or when no work disqualifies one from the full rights of citizenship and simple dignity as a human? To put it more radically, what happens when freedom and dignity are disarticulated from work? The answer is a different narrative of freedom. One connoted by the Jamaicans' remark, and manifest in the 1801 farm workers' revolt in Haiti, as well as the Tunisian revolution of dignity and freedom. This is to put Tunisia in relation to Haiti along an oppositional line to that of the militarized neo-colonial state. Pursuing that line, we should take note that an issue in the contestation between the process of market-driven subjectivity and the revolutionary capacity to create new forms of collectivity is some process of individuation that has the practical and very material function of socialization, of creating a certain type of individual suitable for a certain type of sociality. The individuation process of capitalist market, and I mean throughout its history from the early commodity markets of the 10th century Europe to the current neoliberal market of global finance, may indeed have engendered the normative subjectivity of the market through its endless refashioning and management of desire and imagination. But it also engendered something else, as is evidenced by the Tunisian Revolution. This something else is what Zygmunt Bauman termed an aesthetic sociology. The spontaneity of subjective feeling into volatile, unpredictable occasions of consensus. As he says, the instantaneous sociality of the crowd is a counterstructure to the socialization structures. We can understand by this that the cumulative institutionalized practices of disciplining normality, the genealogies of which Foucault elaborated under the loose rubric of biopolitics, within which Bauman includes the legislative rationality of cognitive space, thereby referencing the methodological practices of human sciences in the university, are interrupted by the faceless agency of the crowd. The interruption holds the promise of what Fanon referred to 43 years ago in his aspirational analysis of the potential of the Algerian Revolution as doing something new. This is generally paraphrased as neo-humanism, or or new humanism. But as I said at the start of my talk, I prefer to call it radical humanism, although I will also refer to it often as new humanism. And I mean by this a humanism predicated on something other than the transcendental self behind subjective as well as objective idealism, which is to say the articulation of a distinctly different epistemology from that of the bourgeoisie, even in the latter's revolutionary articulations and aspects. The emergence of the Algerian Revolution, however, teaches that this radical humanism also remains, as Bauman recognizes, susceptible to the managerial strategies of the state. Perhaps Algeria is not the best model after all, because despite Abin Ramadan's and Fanon's heroic efforts to make it such, it was not a popular-based and led struggle in the way